Hello. Right, I think I am streaming and recording. So this is a bit of experiment to see if this approach to recording videos works. Let's see how it goes. So I just wanted to give a quick introduction to Tidal, which is that strange software for live coding pattern and things. And just see what happens if we start from the ground up with just focusing on how to make sounds and sequences. So let's go. So to start with, you can make a sound with Tidal like this. So hopefully, yeah, there's some sound you should be able to hear. Maybe I'll make it slightly louder. That should be fine. So another important thing to do is how to stop it. We do that with hash. So here I'm putting my cursor on this line, pressing Control and pressing Enter. Then it starts running. You can see it flash. And then I move my cursor down here to make it stop again. So what's happening here? Well, D1 is a connection to the SuperDirt synth, which you should have started in the startup process for Tidal. This dollar is something that just kind of it glues together a sort of parameter, a value of some kind. In this case, this little sound with a function. So this is a function that takes this and sends it to SuperDirt, and that just splits it up. And this sound thing means that this, what's coming up, is a sound pattern. In this case, a simple sequence, which just contains BD, which is the name of a set of sounds. So if I change that to drum, that would give you a drum sound, a kick sound actually. But I can also play a different kind of sound like this one. So this colon changes the kind of drum sound that's being chosen. And if you look in your file system, you can find these sounds. So you can go to, I think it's called something, in Open Super Collider. In there, finding the menus, open user support directory, and then you'll find something like dirt samples. Oh, I think actually it's downloaded quarks, then dirt samples, and look in there and you'll find all these folders called, and find one called drum, and then you'll find in there the sound files. You can add your own in there and restart SuperDirt and play your own sounds as well if you like. But let's stick with the default ones for now. Right, so that's how you play a sound and how you stop them. There's some special ones like Super Mandolin, which is actually not a sample but a synth. But again, we can play different notes by choosing different numbers. Can we do minus? Yeah, we can. So that kind of works, but is maybe a bit boring. Let's move on to playing more than one sound at once. So that's just a case of doing something like this. So now we've got a bass drum, a kick drum, and a snare, and it's just playing forever. So, I mean, Tidal is really about pattern. This is a kind of pattern, I suppose, called a sequence. There's a lot more to Tidal than just playing sequences, but actually this little language here has a lot to it. You can do a lot in here, even just by making sequences. I'll show you some of those things. Let's see. For example, you can say play this more than once. Oh yeah, that's familiar from Queen. I could say let's play this 3 times. So already you can hear that there's a bit of an off-kilter thing happening here. It's because I've got 2 of these and 3 of these. So what happens if I add more of these? Well, you can start making more complex rhythms, but you also notice that the more things I add, the more complicated it gets. So that's because in Tidal, I mean, normally with computers, if you add computer music, if you add more things, then the sequence would just get longer in time. But in Tidal, actually the important thing is actually the cycle. That's what the reference point is. So by a cycle, I mean kind of something like a musical bar or something, a kind of measure. Usually it's repeating, not always, or has some kind of repeating structure to it. So that's kind of because Tidal was heavily inspired by a language called the Bol processor by someone called Bernard Bell. So this, in particular, version 2 of it. So this is originally for something. It was for originally notating tabla rhythms. So it was for notating music in Indian classical music. Eventually, he started using it for generating new music, and you can still get it. It's a really nice system. Yeah, so it's inspired by Indian classical music, which at least this kind of Indian classical music is very based on cycles. So the cycle is really key. So you can have really quite long cycles and add lots of things to it. So yeah, the more things I add here, the faster it goes. Okay, so but let's go back to something short. You might have noticed actually I use this little thing, the tilde or twiddle. That just adds a kind of bit of silence, so it kind of represents nothing. So I can put these in here. So these have got, now this sequence has got 7 things in, so it's a bit kind of non-4/4, which you might like. Right, so what else can we do in here? So we can actually play 2 rhythms at the same time. So let's stick back with a nice bass drum clap. Oops, mistake. So we've got that. But if we put a comma here, then that means that we're starting a new sort of sequence here. So let's put an ARP in here. So now that's lining up with the bass drum. There we go. And we can add another one. So again, this is all happening within the space of a cycle. So each cycle we've got a bass drum clap, which is 2 things, against these 3 ARPy sounds, which is 3 things. So we get 2 against 3. A kind of polymeter. Okay. So that's pretty fun. We can do that sort of thing. We can also use the same syntax just to make a sort of subsequence. So if we had this, we could say take this and add an RP in there. So you can kind of hear that each one is a sort of step. So we've got bass drum. Well, maybe it's slightly less confusing if I put all the bass drums first. So now we have 3 bass drums, then a snare RP inside the same duration. So really this is a step sequence with 4 steps in it: bass drum, bass drum, bass drum. But then the fourth one is broken down into 2, so it goes faster to fit those 2 sounds in the shape in the same time as 1 bass drum. And then you can put, so if I made this a 2-step sequence but broke them down different ways. So that gets pretty interesting. You've got 3 against 4. So basically this square brackets is for grouping, making a sort of subsequence, grouping lots of sounds into the time frame of 1 sound, but then also, if you like even here, I could add something like, I don't know, can I think of anything more interesting? Maybe some can sounds. Might be alright. There you go. And if you want, you can even put a subsequence inside a subsequence like this. Let's see. So we could say, do this sort of thing. So have a bass drum, then you can. So this is like a quarter of a cycle, no, half of a cycle, and then this subsequence takes up the rest of the cycle. That's got 4 steps in, but the third one is broken down into 2. So that one, I guess, would be 1/8 of a cycle, and this would be a 16th of a cycle, and it would all add up to 1. It always does. There you go. So one more thing. When we do this sort of thing, as I was saying, the sort of 2 parts of it happen within a single cycle. And it's the cycles that align, not the steps. But there is actually a way of doing it so the steps actually align. So let's try that with curly brackets instead. So you can hear it still going between the bass drum and the snare. But then, probably, no, all right. But then at the same time, this is lining up. So you can hear the beats are aligning, but there's a strange thing happening with them sort of rolling over each other, because in the space of 3 of these happening, these cycles, there's 2 of these cycles happening, because the RP lines up with that, then the clap lines up with that, but then this lines up with the bass drum, and then the RP lines up with that, and it keeps going round. Okay, so that's kind of all I wanted to cover in this introductory session. So we've looked at how to play sounds, how to pick different ones from there, how to stop making sounds. What I didn't say actually is that you can make sounds a different way just by replacing it with silence. But a hush is another way. You'll see the difference between those later in a future video. We've looked at making a sequence, adding in some silence with this tilde. We've broken down steps into subsequences. We've used commas to play several subsequences at the same time on top of each other, and have more than one subsequence in one pattern, in one sequence. We've had a subsequence within a subsequence, and we've had different kinds of polymeter and polyrhythm. Good. Yeah, I think that's polymeter and that's polyrhythm, but I always get confused between them, so don't quote me on that. Right, so this was a bit of an experiment. Let's see how it works. If you've got any feedback, I'd really appreciate it. But yeah, and let me know if you'd like what you'd like me to cover next, if it was useful. All right, thank you. Bye.